the whole test relies on, sort of relies on human, the psychology of humans, which Turing didn't take into account, the psychology of the person making that decision of whether it's a human or not. Anyway, I'm going to leave that and let, or do you want to open it up a little bit first?
Yeah, we'll talk and then we'll see where we are. I'm probably going to bounce around to some PowerPoint slides. So, why don't we get some reactions to this? Do any of you recognize what is Dana call it, the zombie? Is it the paradox?
The zombie paradox. I think it's normally known as it.
Does that sound familiar to any of you? Have you heard some version of it in other classes?
It's at the end of it, and anyone else, like, you don't really know if anyone else is conscious, and everyone just be zombies walking around.
No, actually, I mean, it may be relevant, but I have one of these problems with eyes. I need to have some optical enhancement here.
Is it analogous to NetBlock's Chinese nation? Is it analogous to NetBlock's Chinese nation?
To whose Chinese?
NetBlock's Chinese nation?
I don't know.
It's essentially the same thing, that you have a whole bunch of, he puts it, Chinese workers working inside of a brain, and their job is to input, output.
That's Searle's experiment, not Block.
No, it's Block's too. Block talks about Chinese nation, Searle talks about Chinese room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're two different things.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess they're
Block's
the same.
one.
Yeah. So it's the zombie brain, essentially. It's a, he does it different.
Yeah, Searle uses it as a definition of consciousness, whereas...
Let me, I don't think so. Let me just see if I can pull up a PowerPoint slide that I use in another class, but it'll help to visualize the point I'm making. There it is. I'm a Mac person, so I'm not at all familiar with PCs. When we started the class, I suggested that we'll have to start thinking historically. And these are typical ways in which we might generally think historically in a Western tradition. Okay? So the zombie paradox that we're getting formulated for us in this postmodern time is actually a variation on something that Aristotle writes about. And I believe it's in the Physics or the Metaphysics. And it's it has to go like this. If I have a boat, let's call it the Argos. I think that's the name, if memory serves. It might be a different name. But Aristotle says, let's imagine that we have a ship or a boat of some kind, and that we replace a couple planks. Is it still the Argos? And then he says, well, what happens if we replace every board? And let's say I'm the owner of the Argos. I'm going to just extend Aristotle's argument here. Let's say I'm the owner of the Argos, right? I have papers that demonstrate I'm the owner of the Argos, but it's a 2,000-year-old boat, right? And I've replaced absolutely everything on the Argos. Is it still the Argos? So all Dennett is doing, right, is taking this classic thought experiment from Aristotle and changing the contents of the object from a ship to a human being, and planks to...
What did Aristotle say? What was his answer?
Aristotle's answer, in broad general strokes, has to do with his concept of substance. Okay, so the answer will vary depending on how you interpret the Aristotelian notion of substance. But I'd actually want to go back and check the text. I wasn't planning on talking about this, so I don't want to put words in Aristotle's mouth. But I believe he would say that it's a material object, but in form, okay, and in name, and potentially as a legal entity, it still is properly called Argos, okay. But the answer would be a sophisticated one. It wouldn't be a simple answer. Aristotle really felt that there was something called, that in Greek, I think the Greek word for it was upokaimenon. When the Romans tried to translate that Greek word into Latin, they used their word for that we call substance. And so in English, we talk about how an entity is made up of both substance and accidents. So you might think that you're the same person you were when you were born, or when you were 3 or 4 or 5 years old, right? And that's, Aristotle would say it's because you haven't undergone a substantial change. We've all undergone accidental changes. We've gotten a little taller, a little fatter, a little less hair, some places, right, and so on. And so what we discover is that we're still somehow the same person. Something persists, and he'd call that our substance. But when I die, Aristotle didn't believe in the immortality of the soul or anything like that. So when I die, I'm gone. And so death is a substantial change. So the reason I was hesitating with the Argos example is it's been a long time since I checked the text to be sure how he would account for that. I'm not sure that substance is that becomes an issue in the text precisely, but I'll check on it.
I only saw that Dennett one this afternoon. I find it fascinating that I didn't know that Turing's thought experiment came from Descartes. And now I find that Dennett's comes from Aristotle.
Right, yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. Right. So, now the reason I put this chart up here is when I'm teaching in the English department, I'm often trying to remind our students that while we're operating in this, perhaps in this post or postmodern time, that we're always drawing on much older discourses to think about the questions that our world presents to us. So Descartes, right, is writing around 1630. He belongs roughly to, depending on how you situate things, some people will place him in the Renaissance and Reformation. Writing around 1630, he's sort of at the beginning of what some people call the Age of Reason. Some people think that he actually is the philosopher who starts this period that we associate with the privileging of human rationality. And so Descartes is right here. But think about it, right? We're living in a complex, historically determined culture, not completely determined, and a lot of the language, a lot of the concepts, a lot of the things that we think about, even Dennett's example, is drawn from the ancient world, where the concept of what makes a thing, or what makes a person, is very different than in a post-Cartesian, or even in a Cartesian moment. How am I doing? Is this helped kind of more clearly visualize what I'm suggesting when I say we think historically? In a way, this is an illusion, right? I mean, history isn't just sort of back there. It continues to persist in different ways, in very asymmetrical ways. So some things persist, other things are forgotten, other things are radically distorted in the process. But another way to think about this is that an idea that, say, a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher might have had might not be fully understood until we can invent a machine that appears to think. Is that making some sense? So there could be, the language works in a very strange way. There could be, in fact, there probably are, ancient insights in ancient texts, right? That when we discover something that appears to be new to us, we can go back and we can hear what's said in that language quite differently, okay? So imagine that you come up with a thought, a radical thought, or let's say we create a machine. Right? A lot of us might not know what the potential or the capacity of that machine is, that tool is, until someone 200 or 300 years from now says, look what I can do with this. A quick example that'll drive this point home is the telescope. The telescope was basically a toy, and then it began to be used as a military instrument, and then it became, of course, with Galileo in particular. And around 1609, the telescope became a serious instrument for science. Okay, so a lot of times we don't know exactly what the potential is of a thought or of a tool or of a machine. So this is telling us something about time and temporality. So when we're thinking about tools and time, we're learning something here that's kind of fascinating if you think about it. These glasses were made for me, you know, but they're gonna, if I put them in this case or somewhere, they could sit on a shelf in my apartment. If let's say I die and the rooms are closed up and no one ever goes in there, they could sit there for thousands of years, couldn't they? And so, although they're my glasses, they don't share in my temporality. Now apply this to a different sort of thing. Let's say you're a writer of short fiction or poems, and you write some poetry, and your poetry sits in a in a trunk somewhere in a British mansion, and somebody finds your papers. This actually happened with the famous medieval poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It was written, nobody knew about it for centuries. It was discovered. So although it was written in the Middle Ages, it didn't have any readers until much later. Yes, questions?
At the end of the video, I think he jokingly talked about how like dumbest human could be compared to like a computer, almost.
Yeah, I wasn't following that whole part of that
and
video.
I don't know, I took part of it because you said the substance and then Socrates, or,
Aristotle.
Aristotle, excuse me. But now, but the philosophical question would never be answered, I feel. Even with the whole possible replacements of replacing the whole human mind with, any technological advance that we have today, because you can't replace the essence of man. You can't, replace the essence of the mind, the brain. Yeah, you can have an intelligent and very conscious robot sooner or later, but it won't be what everybody else was asking since the dawn of time. Is like, what makes us conscious, what makes anything conscious for that matter. So, I don't know, I just feel as though, substance is cool, but the essence is, you never replace
I see
it.
what you're saying. I wasn't following you. You want to draw a distinction between substance and essence?
Yeah, well, not in the sense of AI, but the whole goal of
In
AI.
kind of a philosophical sense.
Yeah, the whole goal of it, back then they didn't have, possible replacements for neurological synapses. Now, now that we do, it seems to be all.
But isn't that the question? Isn't that can we replace it with artificial intelligence? You know what I mean? Like, isn't that the question?
But I don't know, I think it's an attempt to answer a question that we shouldn't even be touching. It's
What's saying that? Where's the boundary there? We shouldn't touch what question?
how can I put it?
Just try. I mean,
Yeah,
it
it's
doesn't
like-
matter if you don't get it right.
If a computer wants to be as intelligent and conscious as a human, fine, cool. But don't try to replace what people call the soul or the mind or the things that we cannot see, right? What I call the essence. So it's like,
So when you're using the word soul and mind, you're operating with the understanding that these words express
yeah,
an essence to
it's
what it is that
substances
we
like
are.
the brain, the actual neurological process.
Yeah, it would be, but in Aristotle, if we go with the idea that Aristotle didn't believe in the immortal nature of the soul was the principle of movement in bodies. So we human beings and animals can move, and they're basically self-motivating. So when with death comes the loss of the departure of the soul, it just goes away, right? In this Aristotelian model, and so the substance has fundamentally altered.
Because last time she was like, you don't think with your brain, you think with your mind, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just like a computer would never be able to think of its mind.
Now the point in that expression last time was a slightly different point, philosophically speaking. I have an experience of my mind, right? So mind is something of which I'm self-aware, right? In that expression. So mind exists within the realm of appearances. My mind appears to me, right? I don't actually see it, but I have a sense of it. Okay? So I know when I'm sharp, I know when I'm fuzzy, I know when I'm in the groove, or experiencing flow or something like that. So in that conversation we were having last week, mind is something that's experienced. The brain, however, I know I have a brain, right? I know I have a brain. We can take pictures of it. We can, you can go in there and not, but you can open up my skull and check and see whatever you find necessary. But so it's not like I'm saying I don't have a brain. I know I have a brain, but I don't have an experience with my brain in the same way I have an experience with my mind.
Yeah.
I think the issue is we're trying to separate, essence from substance.
Yes.
Well, let's assume that they're,
Hold the thought for a second. The word that we often, philosophically speaking, when we're going back to the ancient Greeks, the word that we contrast with essence is, does anybody know, it's existence. Okay? What happens in our modern language is we confuse these two things. So, so go ahead now. I just wanted to, so that we
So
have a sense of context.
confusing, you know, like, if we're making substance and essence too close together, like, let's say that we do have a soul or that we don't have a soul. What it is that's driving us to be sort of this unique personality individual is our reactions to just billions of stimuli since the moment of our, you know, the moment we first came into realizing that, hey, we're an autonomous thing, into, you know, until we die or until we lose our ability to sense anything. So, I mean, what's to say that we couldn't give a computer a soul? It's just it's going to be its reactions to things once it's achieved this sort of human level intelligence. It might not be identical to your soul or my soul, but even at this present time, there are still people we can consider to have, you know, not having a soul. Because we define soul by such arbitrary terms. Like you can say a sociopath doesn't have a soul because they cannot empathize with anyone other than themselves. That doesn't make them not human or not a machine. It's just a difference in their substance.
Maybe. I don't think so. But I'll listen to a few more comments and then I'll circle back to some of these terms.
It's funny that you mentioned Aristotle and all of this, because I mean, and that specific argument, because there's, like, if you go further on, I think, doesn't he pose the question that if you take the old parts of that ship and put it back together, is it still the same ship? Is it still, if the Argos has all of its parts replaced over time, but you take those parts that were replaced and put them back together, are there two ships called the Argos, or is there only one ship? Is that one ship the same thing?
And do you have an answer to that you'd like to propose?
I propose that it is and it isn't. Because I'd even go as far as...
It is, meaning both of them?
It is, yeah, that both of them
Both of them are and are not?
Yeah. And I guess the way I can see it proposed through, you know, AI is what if we could take, it would be interesting to see what could happen if we were to have one person program an AI and pour their being, personality, what have you, into that. Because that's essentially, you know,
so we have three robots we can play around with. So I could pour my essence into one of the robots, and then we could and then I could go home on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and the robot could take over for me. I like what you're saying, though, very much. Let me just say a little bit. Were there other people who wanted to jump in here? Yeah.
At one point, I guess one thing that popped in my mind was, my mind. The phrase, we can say, he's not the same person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How does that fit in to, I guess, what we're talking about? Because I just have some confusion with what some people said with that phrase there.
Help me understand what your confusion is. Can you just work with your own example there for a minute?
Then, like, there's this idea of time and the Argos, I guess, that yes, it's the same ship, but it's a copy of the ship, or it's a rebuilding of the ship, but they're still the same ship. But you can say the same thing about a human, that something, let's say somebody has has post-traumatic stress disorder, something, experience war, and they come back to the environment that they used to be in, and somebody says, well, he's not the same person, but he is the same person. In the sense
has his essence remained the same, but something changed in this person's existence?
But would that fit into the idea of, if we want to, I guess, split mind and brain apart, would that fit into his mind? Because you say, I have an experience of my mind.
Yeah. We're mixing a couple conversations here, but
okay.
I think we might say of a person suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Or anything.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Or just, you know, I'm not the same person I was before I started teaching at SUNY Oswego. You guys have changed me. I'm changing the ways. So it's a trauma. So what we're noticing here is that there might not be a change to my essence, or because you and I share this essence as human beings, right? but there could be a change to my existence. Right? That I'm older, I'm wiser, I get tired faster, don't climb up the stairs as quickly. And I feel bad about all those things because I used to be faster. I was a contender, yeah.
I just wanted to comment on what Brian was saying. I had someone told me one time, it was pretty interesting as far as like the thought experiment, but the person told me that as we get older, we don't really change, we just become more truly who we are. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's kind of how you have to think about it for a while. It's kind of more of a thought experiment thing. But like the type of person that is susceptible to having that kind of trauma or war will experience it and come back and have experienced the effects of the trauma because they were originally susceptible to it in the first place. So they're really just more who they are because they experienced something they were susceptible to.
Right.
Now, this is it's a very nice comment. This is a variation on the argument that I was expressing a second ago, where I was saying that someone might invent a tool, and we really might not understand what that tool is or is capable of for centuries. Okay? So I think you're making a parallel kind of argument, if I'm understanding you. That, and what you're noticing is that whatever it is that we are as people, whatever it is that people are, we have a future. And so the sense of the future means that possibility is part of our present moment. So what does that mean? It means that I'm unfinished, right now as a human being. I don't know what I'm capable of, right? And I don't know that and what none of us know in this room, right? Together, we don't know that we're capable of having thoughts and ideas about this subject about becoming human. And we don't know where these thoughts will lead us. Somebody here might come up with a simple sentence, a wonderful thought, and 300 years from now, somebody will say, that's it, that's the insight we're looking for. So what that's telling us something about what we mean by identity, okay? Identity is a very, I hate these whiteboards because there's not enough resistance. I miss the resistance of chalk. Identity. So identity is a relation, is one of the key insights of this guy you're going to hear me talk about on nauseam, Martin Heidegger. Identity is a relation, he argues. And he thought that insight in the little essay that he wrote was the most important idea he had in the second half of his career as a philosopher. That identity is a relation. In other words, whenever we think identity, we have to think about things being both the same and different. Okay? Rather than being either or. Either this or that. Either or, because when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking.
Yeah, can I jump in for 1 second from coming back from the technology perspective to answer some of this? From someone who studied artificial intelligence, these conversations are the same conversations we have with slightly different, you always have a different, maybe view this in a different way, Patrick, but
okay.
The idea of this distinction between mind and brain is a crucial one. And as we're going to talk a little bit more about Minsky and the kind of hard AI kind of theories, but one of the things they say is that the very idea that humans are special is fooling ourselves. We're not special. It's a form of chauvinism that we believe we have something special that makes us unique. And why is that? Give me some proof. You can't, how can you prove that? So I'm just throwing that out there as an argument against some of the that people have.
An argument against some of the things that students are saying? Or
no, against some of these concepts. Some of the hard AI researchers believe that, the kind of Ken Campbell, the discussion that you can't prove to me that qualia exists.
Right.
So just because you can't prove it.
I agree with you.
I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying
I don't think that we are special. Okay. I do think that the history of human beings thinking about what it means to be human has often created the illusion that we are. Okay. So one of the reasons why I put some of the readings on the canvas that I put there is I want you to listen, actually read and listen to what early Italian humanists were saying about human beings and the soul. Okay. And I think you'll find it to be surprising. I think so. this sense that we're somehow unique and special is what I would call a distorted idea that's been handed down to us without a lot of precision and care. But I do think that there are a lot of people, most of us feel this way, right? We have an experience sometimes where we feel like we've been degraded or there's something less about us. And we feel like, oh, I've transgressed against something, right? I had the occasion when I was a freshman and sophomore in college of working in a penitentiary. I visit a state penitentiary about once a week for an entire summer. And I actually got to know some people who had committed murder. And I got to know them fairly well. And one of the fascinating things that I learned in talking with people who committed murder, these were mostly murders that weren't premeditated. They were just sort of spontaneously acted out in a fit of rage or something, is that when they reflected on their own acts of murder, they were completely beside themselves, in the sense that they couldn't figure out who that person was that they were. So they were caught up in the problem of saying, I did this, but I don't know what that means for me, and struggling with that. So it goes back to your example of he's not the same person. But it goes to this issue of being special too, because a lot of times we have this sense that we can engage in a kind of conduct, either collectively or individually, that denigrates or diminishes that sense of specialness. So, but we'll talk about this a lot. You guys have a lot of hands up, so why don't we, how should we do this? Why don't we start here and we'll go back there and we'll circle around there. Yeah.
With all due respect, and I want to be PC as possible, but
Yeah.
the fact that scientists and well-educated men can say that humans are not special, it's like, it seems to be the trend nowadays, and I am very few to believe that, yes, we are magical snowflakes, that each are different, and we're all unique. Because honestly, science has defined us, and it's like, well, these definitions, like, how can you have yourself a purpose? How can you, like, it makes sense that we are not special, because since, man was first able to put stuff together with his mind, he's been questioning things, purpose for himself, purpose to everything around. So it's like, we are special because we're the only animal that can actually rationally and logically think. And God forbid we gave a computer the intelligence, it would know its purpose. Its intelligent, conscious, whatever, would know it has a purpose in its life. And yet we don't have shit to say about it. It's ridiculous because, I don't know, I get tired of people saying, oh, we're not special. But yet there's people that are like brilliant minds out there. And it's like, what is that? Like, we're still looking for other life. Still makes us special.
What I do in response to this is I'd say, well, maybe we need to find a different word. We might want to say that human beings are unique. Okay? And so whatever it is that makes us human is something that's unique. Now, the question becomes, if we think about possibility, the question becomes, would it be possible that the thing that you and I think makes us unique now could be shared with other species or with machines? Okay? So I'm fascinated by the possibility that we may actually be able to engage in some kind of sign language with higher apes, for example, right? And so that's, I think, a potential, right? People that are working in those areas, they see that there's potential there. So rather than saying it can't happen, or rather than saying it shouldn't happen, right? My approach to it is that, well, maybe there's something that you and I as human beings are capable of, right? And we could call that special, right? But that special or unique thing, whatever it is that we have, may still be something that we could potentially share with other species. Now, what does that tell us? Let's take the next step there. That other species, right, then would also have their own set of unique characteristics or special qualities, right? And wouldn't it also stand to be the case that they may have something that they could contribute to us? Okay? So that's how I work the problem anyway. Right? Now, one of the things that you're saying, I know a number of you want to jump in here, but let me just take a brief minute to talk about the position I think you're holding, some variation on the position that you're holding. It has to do with the difference between essence and existence. If I heard you right, Gabriel, you basically want to say there is something essential about human beings, right? I'm hearing that, is that right? Okay, so let's think about what this thing essence is. in the ancient world, one of the synonyms for essence was the word quiddity, or in English we translate it as whatness. Technical term. So let me just ask you a question. What is a unicorn? It's a mythological animal with a horn. Kind of looks like a horse.
It's an idea.
It's an idea, right? Okay, so right, we know what a unicorn is, right? So we can come up with all these different representations of unicorns: a toy, a cartoon, a drawing, a mythological story, okay? But through all of that, we know what a unicorn is. And a unicorn has essence.
No physical.
No, a unicorn, because existence is what you're talking about. The word you want to keep in mind for existence is thatness. Right? So you can tell me what a unicorn is, and I'll say, show me one. Right? Unicorns have no thatness. They have no existence. Except representations of unicorns do. Yeah.
The substance and accidents and the essence and existence, these don't fit into each other at all in any particular way, do they? They're not part of the
Sure.
same. Yeah.
Which ones?
It's like substance and accidents and essence and existence. Are these two like things? So they're part of separate cognitions entirely? Or
Substance and accidents have to do with existence.
I want to make sure I got that.
Yeah. In this Aristotelian vocabulary, but there are lots of different ancient and medieval philosophers in particular who work all kinds of variations on these concepts.
Okay.
So the Catholic Church, right? You go to any of you Catholic, you go to church on Sunday. You were an altar boy.
I was an altar boy.
I learned this from Facebook. So you can explain the doctrine of transubstantiation. What's transubstantiation?
It's the fact that when you take the host in the Mass, you're given a little piece of bread, you believe that that is the body of Christ.
That's right.
Transubstantiation. When the priest blesses it, it becomes a holy object. It turns into something else. Absolutely
Right?
ridiculous.
The bread and the wine undergo a substantial, in this sense of substance, they undergo a substantial change, right? So it's no longer the essence of bread and wine, right? It's the body and blood of Christ in this Catholic theology. So now, there's an older language behind this, okay? Behind this language of substance and accidents. It's the language of presence and memory, okay? And that's one of the unique insights of Martin Heidegger. We're going to talk a lot about this guy Heidegger because he's on the trail of these ideas. And a lot of people that are doing transhumanism, kind of postmodern cyber stuff, the Bennett's and of the world, and so on, the Searles of the world, they don't belong to this philosophical tradition. They wrote off this philosophical tradition that Heidegger's operating in when they were grad students. Okay? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to say, if we really want to make progress in a conversation between computer scientists, cognitive scientists, and people in the humanities, the philosopher who's going to really give us a lot to work with, where we can create some common languages, is going to be Heidegger. So.
But there are people who are still referring to him in the Trans-Humanism, not the Dennis and Searles, but there are many theorists who are going back to these concepts.
And then
we may do some.
We will be. And the more important person who advances Heidegger's thinking in a lot of ways will be Derrida. And we'll talk about it.
And a lot of them are the feminists.
A lot of the feminists.
A lot of the feminist theories are actually going back to those philosophers.
They are. They're people who were writing. They're all people about my age. They're my generation of scholars who went through a certain period of doing interpretive theory in the 1980s. Hold on, Tom. We were going to go this way, right? Loop around. So, I'm drawing a blank on your name. Philip, and then Brian.
Okay. I have like multiple thoughts. This might be jumbled.
Okay.
One of the things that I guess I like the word uniqueness for beings better than special. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it's kind of one of the reasons I'm interested in transhumanism is one of the problems with, I guess even we could have this problem with, is it's almost this idea that humans are done. And one of the things I like the idea of the possibility, because at some point science will be able to either create a completely artificial brain, humans will be recreated to some extent, and humans will start becoming more robotic with cybernetics. And a lot of the problems with the role, I guess, are that are how we treat other species, and it's because we think we're special. So then if other life forms have this humanness, to me you can almost make the world a better place, because then you're almost having like different levels of humanity. This human is, I don't know, some kind of cybernetic human. Is it still human, or is it higher being than this human? They both have the same consciousness. So then how does that translate to the way we treat other animals?
So I love the question. I think I belong to that group of people who would say, let the police make sure our papers are in order, right? As a way of answering this question, right? Because we're trying to say, let's create all these nice, neat, tidy categories. Why?
Yeah.
But why do we need to say this is X, Y, and Z, and this is QRS, whatever? I mean, what's the force that's driving that pressure to define? Okay, and I think it has to do with some old habits of our species as human beings, where we are very tribal, right? We say if you fit these, if you have these attributes, you're one of us. If you don't, then you don't belong. So it's but we can talk about that in more detail.
To me, I guess it gets back to the question of what is human, because, and I think at a certain point, science is going to come to the point where our human being as beings as now in this room isn't necessarily going to be unique anymore.
Mm-hmm. How much classic sci-fi revolves around that question of the rights of alien, organic, cybernetic organisms compared to human rights. It's a common theme through much stuff.
Let me just keep talking. I'm sorry. I think you have to lie.
But the interesting thing from that is you were talking about meta-humans, things what about things that don't have that uniqueness of human, but are intelligent, we would class them as an intelligent organism, because that has the same rights, we would treat it in a way as a machine. At what point does the robot vacuum cleaner stop being a servant and have to be paid a wage? It's a question of there's a continuum here, and there's some point where you switch over. When does that happen? Which is one of the things that's.
Going under, you could think of the specials, aka the chicken heads from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. How they were kind of punted off into special areas, and they were pretty much left on Earth. The specials from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Yeah.
How they were just kind of shunted off to one side. They were barely recognized as humanity. They were given special treatment. They were treated like a special education student would be. So
this is from Philip K. Dick's book.
Read Slow and Green.
Yeah.
Okay, how are we doing on time? Let's move around quickly, and we'll just get some quick responses, and then I'll try to zero in on some other ways of kind of formulating the questions that we're talking about. Brian.
Well, I think one of the key issues between here is, human uniqueness, that we're defining everything by human-centered terms. What's to say that machines can't have a machine essence? Why do we have to define them by the human constraints?
Well, machines do.
The fact
The quick answer to your question is machines do have an essence.
So
they have oneness, right? We know what a machine is. We can define it. How do you define something loosely? You take a term like machine and you put it in a class of things, and then you say what makes it unique to that particular class of things. So basically, that's how you get to something like an essence. You engage in very simple practices of definition. Now, and I'm going to come back to that issue in a second. You want to say something more?
Then why does it seem to be such an issue with something as semantic as that? I mean, it'd be no different than if we're giving a computer a dog's essence. It's the substance that appears to be what everyone's having a problem with. It's the
What I'm going to resist in your formula is the word giving part of it.
Well, we're the ones that define it.
Well, we're going to think about, well, not necessarily. We're going to think about this problem, though, right? We often think of objects as somehow not part of us. But what is this? This is the realization of an idea. actually many ideas. So in a way, this tool, is part of human effort. Right? Karl Marx had some brilliant insights into the natures of commodities and objects because he read Hegel. And Hegel has some really insightful understandings. Well, you know, our tools are actually parts of ourselves. Computers, right? So if we create neural nets, for example, this is the kind of the thought experiment of the novel. If we create a neural net, right, the neural net isn't completely divorced from who it is that we are. We're not in the position of controlling it necessarily. So if we give these instruments a certain kind of autonomy, right, they may tell us what they are. And in telling us what they are, they may tell us who we are. This is the reciprocity that Damien's been coming back to over and over again. You can just see that what we're able to do as we sustain the conversation is that we can deepen and deepen this idea, this insight. Go ahead.
But, well, how's it any different than, you know, what if, like, some parents adopted a child that was, you know, not their child from the time it was an infant, it was unaware of these things? Or what if, you know, just two people, like,
it was unaware of what?
I'm sorry.
It was unaware of what? The infant that's adopted?
Yeah, it's unaware of any of these things before. It is shaped by these, I'm not going to say greater things, but by these other things.
Yeah, these older adults.
Well, but it just seems like it's an issue of semantics then, because if your essence appears to be defined by what shapes you or by what is putting essence into you, like data into a machine, then wouldn't computers already have human essence by virtue of being created by humans?
What about nature versus nurture?
Okay, well, wonderful replies here. We just have to unpack the language a little bit. And I know others want to jump in here. There's a debate within this philosophical material that you're touching on. And it's a debate between essentialists, people who privilege essence, versus people who privilege existence. Sometimes they're called existentialists. Okay? And the existentialists basically hold the position that our essence is the result of the choices that we make. Okay? So there's a standard slogan that we use to describe existentialism, and that slogan is existence precedes essence. Okay? So I have thatness, and I do stuff in the world, and that stuff that I do, the ways I relate to people, that makes me what I am. That's a quick overview to this situation. We're going to have to wrap this up because other people want to get involved. But so I'll give you one more chance to reply.
So then what's the moral issue with all of this then?
Right, make sure you include me about that time.
So then what's the moral issue with this then?
What's the moral issue?
Yes.
The moral issue isn't what I'm necessarily preoccupied with right now. Okay? But the issue seems to be the way we speak about these problems. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm trying to listen very carefully to the language that we're using, and then I'm trying to indicate that the language that we're using sets us up for some things that may be false problems. They may be real problems, but we won't know until we listen very carefully to the language we're using. So for example, a minute ago when we were talking, I was talking about how objects are not separate things that are non-human, right? That I was challenging the way you were speaking about we give something to these objects. We grant essence to machines. Right? I was challenging that way of speaking as a way of speaking that sets us up for some problems that we might otherwise be able to avoid.
That's what Marx was saying, right? We attach value.
That's a tough question about what Marx. Yeah. So it's not exactly attaching, but we can come back to it. Hold on, Katie.
Yeah. I was wondering, I keep thinking about the idea of a universal unconscious, you know, Jungian psychology. I'm wondering where that fits in with all of these dichotomies.
The way to situate Carl Jung in this situation is to remember that he was essentially a Kantian philosopher, a person who took Kant's notions of a priori constructs and applied them to the unconscious. So for Kant, our conscious world, just to speak very quickly, our conscious experience is organized according to these categories of time, space, and causality. Okay? But when I fall asleep and dream, there's something like time, space, and causality there, but those aren't the organizing principles of the unconscious. For Carl Jung, the organizing principles of the unconscious are the archetypes. Okay? And those archetypes exist or dwell in the collective unconscious. And then they have a personal component to it. Is that working for you? Or, it's not a completely different kind of discourse, but it's a discourse that comes after this. So insofar as Jung's theories of the psyche are post-Cartesian, he's still privileging the ego and ego consciousness. And that's why a lot of other psychoanalysts, like the Lacanians, would accuse Jungians of being ego psychologists. They give consciousness a certain privileged function. That's not a fair representation of the Jungian position. But I'm just saying it because the Jungian position is a post-Cartesian one. So this is an older discourse. Yeah. Hang on, Tom. You've been very patient. We're coming around. So yes.
Well, going back to
I'm forgetting your name.
Oh, Chris.
Chris, like
going back to the bit about the Argos. Well, you've already attached a name to Argos. You've made that vote essentially kind of special, for lack of a better word.
Just give it a name.
Yeah, exactly. We could make 100 boats. We don't have to name any of them to actually use them as boats. We could switch parts, boat 1 or 2, whatever. When we call it Argo, we're essentially giving it the whatness. We're giving it the essence. We're giving it the idea. We're attaching something to it. We're putting the value of the people who make it, the people who sell it. Think of how we name ships. Yeah. We keep some of these names. There's been 8 ships named Enterprise, for example.
My favorite named boat was the Condoleezza Rice. It was actually an oil tanker. when she became the Secretary of State, they renamed the boat. But when she was working for Exxon, they named an oil tanker after her. And what we're going to talk about this. Hang on. This is a really important example of the notion of christening something. Because what that tells us is that a name is not merely a description. A name is an action with consequences. Okay? And Exxon knew it when they changed the name of the oil tank.
Try being named after the son of the devil throughout the war.
There you go. And when you're an ultra white, it's even more difficult. Okay, hold on, we got other people that want to join in the conversation. So we're moving this way. Tom, you've spoken. Anyone over here? Andrew, you've been wanting to talk. Hang on, Tom. Yeah.
No, Tom.
Oh, you're deferred to Tom?
If we take, I was just curious, if we apply the unicorn argument, like that idea of thingness versus, or whatness versus thatness to consciousness, does that mean that the consciousness does not exist?
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean the consciousness doesn't exist. It probably exists in some way. Okay, so there is a whatness to consciousness, right? But consciousness also probably has some kind of thatness, involving the firing of neurons and so on.
The brain-mind distinction.
Yeah. This is really a body-mind distinction. Or let me put it more accurately, in terms of the history of philosophy, the body-mind dualism that emerges in Descartes is a manifestation of this older debate within the history of philosophy. And those of you who know about Saussure, right, when we talk about a sign, it's composed of a signifier, something that we perceive with our senses, and a signified. The Saussurean concept of the sign itself embodies this distinction. Okay, can you make it quick? Because I want to make a few more quick comments to wrap up.
I think this touches on almost everything a number of different people have said, but I think we're all sort of functioning under the assumption of this wholeness of the subject, so that there is consciousness